Next slide. Thank you.
Voice goes on.
Yes. So this is the agenda that we have set up for this evening. It's going to be a lot of discussion. So I do hope that everybody mutes yourself if you are not speaking, so that way we cut down on that background noise. So we just started with our welcome. Our next thing up is going to be Delegate David Reed. And then we are going to go into the remarks from our elected officials. And after that, we will open the floor up for questions and answers. So David, you're up.
So thanks, Lisa. And I really do appreciate everyone letting me go first, because I had already committed to be on the Ashburn Dems meeting today at this same time. And then this came up. And so I accidentally dialed into them and then had to say, oops, sorry, I can't be here. I've got to go to the other one. So I have to get back to them. But as far as the constitutional amendment is concerned for redistricting, and please understand that there's a difference of opinion both within the House Democratic Caucus, as well as there was a difference of opinion between the House and the Senate about how to move forward. So I'm just going to try to provide you with my viewpoint on what prompted me in 2019 to vote for the amendment, and then a year later in 2020 to vote against it. And part of that is that you need to understand the constitutional amendment process, because the reason why there's a year delay in between is because you're actually looking at making substantive changes to the Virginia Constitution. And that time in between is intended to be a cooling off period for you to be able to think about and analyze what the actual repercussions are going to be for adding this to the Constitution. So just keep that in mind. The other thing is that I want to tell you, when we started looking at this in 2020, there were a lot of kind of red flags that went up for me that made me really concerned about the fact that we were making a bad decision by moving forward with a decision that we had made in 2019. This is where I kind of really rely on my experience as a naval intel officer, because I started to get what's called INW, indications and warning, that this was not a good thing for us in general, because of the fact that the Republicans were so enthusiastic about it that it's like, that can't be, they're not going to do anything that's going to be good for us. So it has to be, if they're so enthusiastic about it, this can't be a good thing. And I think one of the things that might have actually pushed me over the edge on that kind of INW concern was when I probably erroneously got an email from Delegate David LaRoque's wife advocating on behalf of the constitutional amendment. So they were actually pushing out emails and really advocating and really pushing hard for this. And so it's like, okay, if all the Republicans want this, and I'm actually getting an email from David LaRoque's wife advocating for it, then this is probably not a good thing for us, or probably not doing what we really wanted to achieve. So then the other thing that I wanted to do, and I had said to Lisa that I'll try to kind of step through, again, part of the analysis that I went through on this, is that the process that we have right now, without any type of constitutional amendment or any type of legislation, is very partisan. The Privileges and Elections Commission, the Privileges and Elections Committees in both of the two houses would be the ones that would start the process for drawing the districts. And if you are in the majority, as we are now, then it would be very partisan. So that's just the way that it's happened kind of throughout time. What I think most of our goals have been to do is get to a nonpartisan type of redistricting, which would not involve legislators. So think about this. We know that we have a very partisan process right now. We wanted to get to a nonpartisan process that did not include legislators. So what does the amendment do? The amendment is more bipartisan, not nonpartisan, because it would still include 8 legislators. So if your goal is to not have the legislators involved, well, that's not what this amendment does. And there are going to be 4 from the House and 4 from the Senate, and those are all picked based upon who's in the majority. And then there's going to be 8 citizen members that are going to be part of this as well. And they are drawn from a pool that are nominated by partisan legislators. And then if you want to carry that down to the next part, it's like they're actually going to be selected by justices, former justices that were at one point in time appointed by the legislators. So there's a whole lot of partisanship built into the amendment that we ended up approving. Sorry. And the other thing is that it ends up, if it all doesn't work out, if those folks can't decide how it's going to work out, then what happens is that it's going to go to the Supreme Court, the Virginia State Supreme Court. And what that effectively does is it turns what we would like for our judiciary to be at the highest level in the state, it turns them from being a nonpartisan judicial thing to now having to draw partisan judicial lines. And one of the things that I think some of the folks who have really gotten involved with supporting this right now is they say that it's better than what we have now. And that's clearly the case. But I would say that that's one of those things where it's kind of a yes, but it still doesn't get us to where we want to be. And then there are other folks who have said, if this doesn't work, we can just fix it later. The problem is fixing it later becomes very problematic because it's being put into the Constitution. If you really wanted to take that approach, what you would do is you would say, let's do this all as legislation right now. Let's see how it works. We can do nonpartisan redistricting right now in legislation and have it in effect for 2021. And then we can tweak it and we can go, this didn't work, but this did work. We now know what the timeframes are and everything. And then we could make a commitment to ourselves as, hopefully we're still going to be in the majority, to actually implement a long-term solution in the Constitution that has been tested. Right now, we're putting something in the Constitution that has not been tested and still has a whole lot of partisanship built into it. So that's kind of the whole thinking process that I went through from 2019 when I voted yes, and I thought this was going to be the best deal that we could get, to the point where we got to 2020. And again, like I said, that time in between is supposed to be so that you can analyze, look at what the downsides are, and then be able to make kind of an informed decision about, do I really want to make this type of change to the Constitution, which is the top law of the land for Virginia. So that's one side of the presentation. And again, I know that John and Barbara and Jennifer all have different perspectives, and I know I see Wendy's on here now. Wendy has a perspective that we spent a lot of time on the floor talking about, a lot of the details and the nuance, and I'm not going to speak for her, but it was really a tough decision to go from that yes to a no. But again, I thought that it was the right thing to do so that we could actually get to the goal that we wanted to get to, which was true nonpartisan redistricting that did not have legislators involved with it. That's it.
And thank you so very much.
Sure.
And I know you want to be getting off and heading over to the Ashburn meeting. We will let you do that.
Thank you very much, and thanks everyone. If the other meeting gets done soon, I'll come back, and remember, as John always says, if you have any tough questions, be sure and ask John Bell.
Okay.
Thank you, Delegate.
He beat me to it.
All right, thank you everyone. Bye.
Thank you, Delegate Reed. And next up on our agenda is Shelley.
Thank
Give
you.
us some information.
Okay, so apologies. A bunch of what I'm about to read off is going to be a repeat of what Delegate Reed so thoughtfully put together for us. But I can't edit on the fly, so you're just going to have to deal with the repetition of some of it. So the Virginia Constitution currently puts redistricting into the hands of the General Assembly. This constitutes a partisan gerrymander since the party in power can draw the maps. Amending the Constitution requires a bill be passed by the General Assembly twice with an election in between, then be voted on in the general election. 2019 was the last possible opportunity to pass an amendment to be voted on in 2020 for redistricting in 2021. In 2019, the Republicans held bare majorities in both houses and were looking at the possibility of losing their majorities in 2020. So they orchestrated passage of a compromise amendment bill. The amendment creates a bipartisan redistricting commission of 8 legislators and 8 citizens. The legislators are evenly divided between the 2 major parties and the 2 General Assembly houses. The 8 citizens are selected from names submitted by the party leaders and chosen by retired circuit court judges named by the Virginia Supreme Court Chief Justice. The process overall is open to the public and, quote, districts shall provide where practicable opportunities for racial and ethnic communities to elect candidates of their choice, end quote. That's language from the amendment itself. The amendment does not contain language forbidding partisan or bipartisan gerrymandering. A supermajority of the commission members is needed to submit maps to the General Assembly for approval. The General Assembly only gets an up or down vote. Failure to gain this supermajority support or approval from the General Assembly results in the Virginia Supreme Court being tasked with drawing the maps. Virginia is one of only 2 states where Supreme Court justices are appointed by the General Assembly, and the majority of ours were appointed by Republican majorities. I believe the language in the amendment that requires adherence to the Voting Rights Act would ensure some representation of minorities, but would not maximize it. As a recent example, the Virginia 3rd Congressional District was overpacked for the Black community. When the U.S. Supreme Court ordered lines to be redrawn, we went from 1 Black congressional representative to 2. And I don't see that the amendment language would prevent packing similar to that. Because of its flaws, the Democratic Party of Virginia 2020 State Convention delegates passed a resolution against the amendment and urged all local Dem committees to put a no for the amendment on their sample ballots. We have been told by DPVA that we can either put a no on our sample ballots or take no position, but we cannot put a yes. If we put a yes on our sample ballots, it is likely that someone will protest this action to the 10th Congressional District Democratic Committee. Actions could be taken against LCDC by either the 10th Congressional Dem Committee or the State Dem Committee, such as fines, replacement of officers, or even collapsing our entire committee and reforming it. While such extreme measures may be unlikely, our leadership would be tasked with defending LCDC in messy proceedings for months when we need to be concentrating on the election. If the amendment is defeated, Senate Bill 717, which is also House Bill 1255, the enabling legislation that was passed, will be in effect for the 2021 redistricting. It includes requirements for equal population, racial and ethnic fairness, preservation of community interest, be it social, cultural, or economic, compactness and congruity, and prohibits maps favoring any political party. I am personally very much against enshrining another instance of a 2-party system into the state constitution. In my opinion, it's our 2-party system that has allowed the extremely divisive and polarized tenor of our current political climate to exist. Bottom line, this amendment is not the nonpartisan solution that folks have been working towards for decades. It's a bipartisan solution that will become an incumbent protection scheme. If the amendment is defeated, it will ensure that folks will pursue a better one. If a flawed amendment is allowed to be placed into the Virginia Constitution, there may not be an effort to pass another one. And now we are going to let the rest of the electeds who are online to address you one by one, starting with Senator Favola.
I think you're on.
Senator Favola, you're muted.
Mute.
Thank you, Shelley. Thank you, Lisa. And thank you to all of you who organized this meeting and all of you who are choosing to spend some time with us to talk about this issue. Let me just say that the folks, the elected officials, by and large, are very much committed, at least on the Democratic side, to coming up with a very workable way to draw our districts that does not reflect partisan politics. Now, we are quibbling right now over what is the best way to go about doing that. I did support the legislation establishing a constitutional amendment. I supported it in 2019 and continued to support it in 2020. But let me just say, I believe that additional legislation would be helpful in actually articulating solutions to some of the issues that have been raised by those who are opposing the constitutional amendment. I will start by saying, I guess you all know, the constitutional amendment would establish a 16-member commission. 8 members would be lawmakers, 4 members from the House, 4 members from the Senate, and then the House and Senate members would be equally divided between Republicans and Democrats. The 8 citizens would actually be appointed by retired circuit court judges, which provides some, in my mind, provides some level of objectivity. The constitutional amendment also would require a supermajority of the commission to actually come up with a proposal to give to the General Assembly. In fact, 3 out of the 4 House delegates and 3 out of the 4 senators would have to agree to whatever proposal comes to the General Assembly. But why it's important to have this in the Constitution, I think, are 2 really, really good reasons. First off, it gives this objective process, and I do believe it will be objective, this objective process of the permanency of our Constitution. And there's language in the constitutional amendment that ensures all voting act rights provisions are in there, that any state or federal law dealing with protecting nonpartisan voting has to be adhered to by the commission. And then, of course, the Equal Protection Clause of our 14th Amendment is mentioned in the constitutional amendment. So this would be the first time that we would have something in our state constitution that would actually protect racial and ethnic fairness when it comes to drawing legislative districts and congressional districts. So I thought that protection was really worth it. I will say that the Black Caucus in the Senate was very much in favor of this constitutional amendment. And I understand that the Black Caucus in the House of Delegates was not in favor. So there was a divide there. And I guess what we would have to say is, for the critics who are concerned that if the commission cannot reach an agreement because of the high bar required for agreement and the fact that it would go to the Supreme Court, I would say there has not been a court in the land, not one court in the land that has drawn districts. The courts traditionally turn to an expert or a master in this area. And I am very confident that's what would happen with the Virginia Supreme Court. They would not sit down and draw those districts. There was concern because the Supreme Court appointees had traditionally come from a Republican General Assembly. But as you know, justices seem to have their own views once they get appointed. We know that from Chief Justice Roberts, who's on the U.S. Supreme Court. So I just want to point out that the role of the Supreme Court should not be a make or break in whether you support this constitutional amendment. And I also want to point out that if we did not have the constitutional amendment and the General Assembly drew the lines, we would face a lawsuit and it would end up going to the Virginia Supreme Court. So there's not a way to legislate out the Virginia Supreme Court. And that is an answer to the critics on that point. And I guess the other point was, some of the critics were concerned about the racial composition of the commission. And I think that can be addressed by the leadership in the House and Senate, each, the Speaker of the House would appoint the delegates, President Pro Tem of the Senate would appoint the senators, and then constituents like you and others would give us names of people you would like us to turn over to the retired judges, circuit court judges who appoint the citizens. So we can certainly ensure that we have good minority representation on the commission. And the other point I want to make, which was really important to me in my vote, and I strengthened the constitutional language before I voted for it in 2020, and that is the transparency language. There have to be at least 3 public hearings before a draft is even created. All records of the commission are open to the public. There's some pretty rigorous sunshine requirements associated with this constitutional amendment. And I believe that those sunshine requirements will, in effect, give us the process that we believe would be worthy of what we want to achieve. I don't know if I have other, and I will finally conclude by saying that the explanation, which will be widely dispersed by the State Board of Elections, essentially is going to say this to voters. A yes vote will make a bipartisan commission responsible for the initial drawing of election districts. A no vote will leave the sole responsibility for drawing the districts with the General Assembly. And that will be the widely dispersed explanation of the constitutional amendment as we move forward for the November 3rd election. So I compliment everybody who cares enough to study this, and we'll see where the committee wants to go. I know it's been very, very contentious, and I completely understand if the committee comes up with a position of perhaps they shouldn't take a position. I completely get that. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Favola. Senator Bell, you are up.
Good evening. I'll try to take a different approach from others, and I'll tell you a few different things about this, since I don't want all of us repeat this. I will tell you, as an elected official, I voted for the amendment when I was a delegate in the House of Delegates before the election, when I was elected to the Senate, and then as a senator, I voted for it. And for me, I've campaigned on this issue since 2009, and I've consistently said I'm for nonpartisan redistricting. Democrats have consistently said we are for nonpartisan redistricting. So I believe, frankly, we are going to pay a heavy price if this is defeated at the hands of all the Democratic committees, and we need to really keep that in mind. One thing I would recommend for LCDC, given the ramifications, if this were a vote from LCDC to support, I would recommend LCDC take a no position on this issue. It will keep the committee from being reorganized and, frankly, getting us off track with what we need to do this year, which is to defeat Donald Trump. And that's the number one thing. I'll give my feelings on the amendment and pros and cons. And again, I'll try to say something different. You personally, I recommend you vote your conscience, what you feel is best. But for the committee, I think a no position is the best way for the committee, again, not to get caught up in a battle with DPVA. So a couple of things that I want to say. Again, it's very hard to change the Constitution. Our founders were very smart in the way that they framed it. It's difficult to pass something through 2 separate General Assembly sessions with an election in between. Having said that, a lot of thought went into this amendment. Senator George Barker, a Democrat, worked very, very hard to make sure there were many different controls to prevent gerrymandering with this amendment. I can tell you right now, there's no amendment we can come up, if this is defeated and we do it all again, that will make it perfect. It's not possible. Where humans are involved, there will be the chance to gerrymander things. So we need to keep that in mind if we consider defeating this amendment, which is, again, it's been very hard to get to the point we're at today. I very strongly, matter of fact, I would bet 100% of my next paycheck that if this is defeated, there will be gerrymandering next year in Virginia, and it will be done at the hands of all Democrats. Because if this is defeated, The General Assembly will make the decisions on this. And it will not go to the voters again for another decade. Because if we pass it again with an election in between, the voters won't have a chance to do something until after the next census in 2030. So realize if we defeat this now, then we're going to be gerrymandering. The good news is we'll benefit. You know, frankly, Democrats will be in power a long time. Dave LaRocque will be gone because we'll finally have fair districts out there. But we will also be hypocrites because we've campaigned for years on nonpartisan redistricting, and we're going to go against that if we defeat this. So we need to keep that in mind. My good friend David Reed, let me disagree with a few things he said. He said he voted for it and there was time in between. There's another key thing that happened, and guarantee you this will be messaged against us. What happened between the time that it was passed the first time and the second time, the election in between? Something huge. Democrats took majority in both bodies. Let's don't lose the fact that we're going to be criticized heavily for that. We were for this amendment until we took the majority. Then we take the majority. Now we're against it. Why are we against it? What's going to be messages? Because we want to go gerrymander. And I guarantee that's probably what's going to happen. So keep that in mind if we look at that. The other thing I'll say is the courts. Granted, there's a risk if it goes to the courts. I'm not going to say there isn't. But we won a lawsuit last year that went to the courts. And the courts appointed special masters, just as Senator Vibola said. And those special masters came in and frankly gave us districts that were more favorable and allowed us to flip several more seats. Because there were 12 districts we sued on. The courts agreed that 11 of them were racially gerrymandered. Traditionally, those 12 districts used to go back and forth between Democrats and Republicans. They would be 6 Republicans, 6 Democrats, 5 and 7, etc. And suddenly, once the Republicans gerrymandered them so bad, they went 9 Republican, 3 Democrats. They were terrible, terrible. We won the court case on that, and as a result, special master from California came in, drew multiple districts, public hearings were held, and the districts were put in place were much fairer. So there is a track record of the courts, frankly, using special masters, as Senator Vibola said. The justices, I think the last things they're going to want to do, regardless of who put them there, is draw districts. They hate getting involved in political stuff. And this would put them right in the middle of that. They're going to rely on experts who are going to come in. Is there a risk there? Absolutely there is. But again, I say that there's no way to do this that's risk-free. Any way we do it, there's going to be risk. Let's go back to this amendment we're looking at now. Who supports it? Virginia 2021. They have worked for nonpartisan redistricting for years. They were very closely involved in crafting this. Talk about the division of people involved in that committee. You've got Ken Cuccinelli, super far right, and you've got many Democrats, super far left, like former House Minority Leader Ward Armstrong. So we've got people from both sides who helped to formulate this, that were a key part of making this amendment up. Again, people in the General Assembly were a part of it. It wasn't just pulled out of a hat. A lot of thought went into it. So I'll just close by saying, I believe everyone needs to examine this. I really appreciate you taking the time to look at this. This is complicated. But in my very strong opinion, if we defeat this, we will be gerrymandered. And we'll be gerrymandered by Democrats. Because frankly, there's Democrats in the General Assembly. If we're honest, they were the victims. I was the victim of gerrymandering by Republicans. Many were, and they're going to look for payback. I honestly don't trust either party with redistricting, because the history shows both parties have gerrymandered all over the place. And until we can get to a computer model where we take humans out of it, I don't think there's any model that's perfect. But as a Democratic committee in Loudoun County, I highly recommend the committee take no position. If the committee takes a position contrary to DPVA, the committee, frankly, will be put into turmoil. And that's something that this year, I believe our number one priority again should be defeating Donald Trump. All of our country depends on it. And frankly, Loudoun County is an absolute critical element of flipping Virginia to the blue side. When Loudoun County goes Democratic, Virginia goes Democratic. So I think that's job one. Constitutional amendment, obviously very important. And that's why I would say each of you vote your conscience on this. I will be voting for it, as I have every time. I've made a promise I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do that. If you disagree with me on that and you believe it's the wrong way, I really respect where you're coming from. But I would separate your personal opinion from what the committee should do. Because if the committee takes that position, there will be consequences. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions later on. And since Delegate Reed dropped off, I think Senator Boysko gets all the tough ones.
Senator Boysko, you are up. Thank you, Senator Bell. And we will be asking questions at the end. So just a reminder on that.
Great. So thank you for having us tonight. I think it's really admirable that we're having this conversation and we're bringing people who have different opinions about this to have a civil conversation. I think it really speaks well to the committee. It's hard to add on to what Barbara and John have said. I have supported this initiative since I was a candidate running for office. And it has been a #1 priority for a number of residents in Loudoun County and in Virginia. At one point, I had heard from more people asking for nonpartisan redistricting than any other topic of anything we considered in the General Assembly. And yeah, I was one of the majority of senators who voted for it as well, both times. One thing that has not come up that nobody has talked about is by putting this language into the Constitution, we are enshrining that we do it every decade as opposed to whenever we feel like it. Many of you will remember in 2008, when President Obama was being inaugurated, there was a very senior African-American member of the Senate. His name's Henry Marsh. He's now retired. It was his joy to go and leave the session for a couple of days to go watch that historic moment in time to see the first African-American president being sworn in. And it was, as I said, it was during the session and he left. While he was gone, there was an effort by the Republicans to all of a sudden go in and do a redistricting initiative. Because at that point, they were right, you know, there was like, I don't remember if they were tied or if there was a 1-vote majority and the lieutenant governor was a Republican, but having Henry Marsh be gone could have flipped the entire outcome of a redistricting proposal. It was the former speaker's good conscience that said, we're not going to do this, but they were ready to do it and they almost did. With this redistricting amendment that would go into the Constitution, it would say we do this every decade. And so that would be one protection for us all from an unintended consequence. The other thing is having citizen members. It's imperative. And in the bill that we proposed that would have accompanied the language that would have filled out more of the details, we were discussing that it would be somebody who's not politically active, who's not a member of a committee. These are regular, everyday people. I don't think we ever got the accompanying legislation out of committee, but it's something we could definitely readdress in the next session if someone would put that back forward. I agree with what Senator Favola and what Senator Bell have said. I believe that our credibility as claiming that we want nonpartisan redistricting will be greatly hurt. And there will be a lot of Virginians who will be, you know, really disappointed, to just put it really plain and simply, that, yeah, we're no different. And I think there is a big piece of that in this conversation, that of course we want to maintain a majority, but we've proven that we can win in Republican districts because of the good policies that we stand up for. You know, John and I both beat Republicans in gerrymandered districts that were meant for Republicans. Jennifer Wexton won a district that was handmade for Barbara Comstock, but the electorate has changed. The electorate is getting more and more progressive. It is getting more and more diverse. I have confidence that we will continue to win on our message, no matter what, whether it's a citizen legislative district done through the Constitution, or if we maintain that in the General Assembly. I am looking forward to having this conversation, hearing from you all about what you're thinking. I know that the party has made a policy statement that we should oppose it. I will chime in and say I would ask that good people can disagree, that we don't need any more division when we're up against Donald Trump. And I would hope that we make a decision perhaps not to come down on either side on this, and let everybody, as John Bell said, vote your conscience. Good people they're good, people have their own reasons, no matter which side you're on here. And we got a big challenge to make sure that we get Donald Trump out of office. And that's where I'm going to be focusing my time. And I just thank you all for having this conversation. Again, I think that Barbara Favola laid out the amendment so well, and John Bell put together his thoughts, which I associate my comments with both of them, and certainly respect my friends on the House side who have a different opinion than we on the Senate side. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Boysko. And speaking of friends on the House side, our last elected official to speak this night is Delegate Gudaitis. Delegate Gudaitis, you are up.
Good evening, beloved Democrats, beloved LCDC. Yes, I had not thought of this putting our good LCDC at risk. So don't put yourselves at risk. Don't put that organization at risk. Just do what you have to do to preserve our good Democratic committee. Sorry, my hair keeps getting my eyes. So everyone has said, vote your conscience. And I agree with that. Our good senators have said that they ran on nonpartisan districting. I didn't. The top issue in my campaign for me personally, and the thing that I talked about most on the doors, was redistricting, but not nonpartisan. It was, and here's the key word, independent. It was independent. That meant so much to me that I got closely aligned with Brian Cannon, who is the executive director of One Virginia 2021. I was so impressed that he was so all on into this drawing fair districts, no gerrymandering. I was so on top of that. He took me to meet with 3 California commissioners. California has an independent commission. I sat down for hours with a Republican, a Democrat, and an independent commissioner from California. I was so impressed and so envious. And Brian Cannon took me to that meeting with them. He has since changed his tune. I know that in the House last year, or in 2019, when we had to first vote on it, we were in the minority. It was our only chance to get something. But I don't know that I'm actually an idealist. Maybe I'm chasing a fairy tale, but the fact is, what I ran on, what I dreamed of, what I thought about, what I hoped for was an independent commission. This will put 8 legislators on a commission to draw lines. Do you want me drawing my own lines? Do you want Dave LaRock drawing his own lines? Do you want Todd Gilbert in the Shenandoah Valley drawing his own lines? I don't. And I don't want me to either, because as impressed as I am with myself, I do realize that I'm human. And why would I not have the tendency to draw something that's going to benefit me? Especially since I'm out here so far west of the population I represent, and I adore the population I represent. The temptation would just be too great. Don't give it to me. Give it to an independent commission. And that's my speech.
Thank you so much, Delegate Goditis. We do have a very short video that we are going to show right now. It's only 2 minutes long at most, and it's a synopsis of the redistricting forum that we just did, Shelley, last month, a few weeks ago. I don't know, it's COVID time. I have no idea what day it is. But Shelley put a really, really good redistricting forum together. So we just brought together some highlights on it for you guys to watch. As you're watching it, please make sure to start getting your questions together, because right after that, we're going to go into questions. And with questions on your Zoom, please click the raise your hand so that we can unmute you and call on you. Tyler, can you show the video? Maybe?
One sec, pulling it up now.
Thank you.
On ballot this session, this election, between a bipartisan redistricting commission that has transparency, minority community protections, which would be historic first in the Commonwealth's Constitution, and a chance for citizens really to have a seat at the table and an equal voice in the process. Or we cannot do that, in which case we'll have some alternative, and I do agree that both Delegate Eric and Delegate Simon want something different, but we just
So I have to tell you that when it comes to this constitutional amendment, that is a hyper-partisan approach. And the Constitution being our most important unifying document, as principal voters, I have to implore you to vote against turning it into a political football, all for the sake of compromise, which is ultimately what this is.
Which was half Democratic, half Republican, and believe me, that is an overrepresented regular people, was able to have a conversation, listen to the testimony, and ultimately draw a line that resulted, not because they were trying to put a finger on the scale, but just because they were listening to the testimony of where people were. They drew lines that resulted in an increase in Democrats in both Congress and state legislature, and a huge increase in people of color representation and being elected.
And quite frankly, passing this amendment doesn't improve it. It bakes in those protections that are not, it eliminates the protections that we should be making sure are there. It just does not make it better.
And as far as this idea, Madam Chairman, it's okay, I'm like, perfecting along the way or coming back, what we still have in the Virginia Constitution, and still haven't gotten rid of it, is a ban on marriages between anything other than one man and one woman. We have the Marshall-Newman Amendment still there. It's hard to change the Constitution, and it's really hard to change it back. And that's why it's worth getting it right first before we go ahead and look through it.
Thank you, Tyler.
Hey, Lisa,
and
could I say something real quick? I kind of answer a question we didn't cover when we were talking about it earlier.
Yes.
Yeah, this question came up. Why are we at this place at this point with so many disagreements? And part of it is the way the redistricting works, which has been explained. It has to be passed 2 consecutive legislative sessions with an election between. Now, to be clear, it started off with a Republican majority. Certainly Democrats had input, but the Republicans ultimately were able to call the shots. And then the second time was Democratic majorities of both houses. The second time the legislature hears the First Amendment, we cannot change even a comma. If we don't pass it exactly the way it was passed the first time, the whole process starts over again, which means we wouldn't have this done for this census. So that's the way the Constitution is made up. So some people wonder, why didn't we change it last year? All we can do is change the enactment procedures, which was worked on very hard for how we're going to action. But the amendment itself has got to be verbatim the way it was from that first legislative session. And I think that's kind of why we're at where we're at, because the real decision was, do we vote this through and try to put the best enactment clause we can together, or does the legislature vote it down because we can't change it at all, or the whole thing starts over? So hopefully that clarifies that question a little bit.
Thank you, John. And with the forum that we did, if you would like to see the whole thing, it is a little bit long, but there's a lot of good information in there. It is on our website. So please make sure to check that out. And we're going to go to questions. We're going to start with Mike Turner and then Jill Weiss.
Hi, everybody. Thanks very much. Thanks, Lisa. I actually came on this call wanting to vote no on this personally. And Senator Bell, Senator Vola, and Senator Boysko and Delegate Goditis have flipped my position in the course of the discussion. A couple of practical considerations from a local standpoint. I think John is exactly right. And in fact, they're all exactly right. If we have campaigned for years against gerrymandering and independent redistricting, and we suddenly come out of the chute and vote against what we have been campaigning against, we're going to look like fools. We will do serious, long-term, endemic damage to the Democratic Party in this state. We will just look like fools. Second, from a practical standpoint, with the language of surrounding the referendum that the voting boards will put out, it is a practical reality because I can tell you the average voter is not paying attention to this. With the language that they will surround this with, if we take no position, that will effectively be a yes vote. From a practical political standpoint, no position will be a yes vote. And if I understand it correctly, taking no position will protect us from a reorg threat from the state party. So I pretty strongly recommend, if what I just said is correct, and somebody please verify it if it's not, or correct me.
That is correct, Mike.
Okay, then I really, really, really strongly recommend that the committee take no position, because the average voter will read that language and they'll go, redistricting, hell yeah, and they're for that and it will pass. I have very great concerns, and frankly, I have no illusions. We're going to get 2 fire-breathing, partisan right-wing Republican senators and 2 fire-breathing right-wing Republican members of the House of Delegates. We just are. So it will almost certainly end up going to the court. But I take it, I take the point that the courts are very likely to appoint a special master, and that is way better than the gerrymandering that John is right will occur. And I want to give you just a little perspective from when I wrote the lines for the county that we're currently living with. Dennis Gordon and I drew those lines 10 years ago on my dining room table, as many of you have heard me say. And I will tell you that the reason Broad Run looks the way it looks is because I had a Democratic supervisor jumping up and down on the desk demanding that all 3 of her residences be included in the Broad Run district. And I finally caved. I just ran out of energy and I finally caved. Now, Broad Run is not a bad looking district and it actually fits the demographic pretty well. But I will tell you that as much as I didn't want to do it, I ended up caving to an outside pressure when I was drawing the line. So, and then the last point I will make is we are going to redistrict in Loudoun County in 2021. And I would very much like to have at least a full faith effort at an independent commission at the state level as a model. If we vote no on this, and we end up gerrymandering, which is what we will do, it will be very difficult to set that model in Loudoun County. So we'll do it because I'm determined to do it. I've already talked to the chair and all the other supervisors that, having gone through this 10 years ago, we are going to do this an independent commission way. It'd be nice to have that role model from the state, from the state perspective. So my recommendation is, don't take a position, protect the reorg. John's right. We do not need an internal food fight about reorganization of the committee. Don't take a position, leave it unchecked. It will pass if it's unchecked. And it's not a perfect solution, but it's a good 85% solution. And I think it puts us on record as supporting what we've been talking about for all this time. Thank you.
Would the electeds like to respond to any of that?
Yes, please. I just want to point out, Mike, that you made my point for me. You, and who was not an elected official at the time, trying to draw a district, caved to who? An elected official. We don't need elected officials involved in this process.
Absolutely.
You just illustrated why. So that's why I personally will not vote for this amendment.
Okay.
I will just say, though, that although there are elected officials on the commission, the commission is independent in the sense that it will act on its own apart from the General Assembly. So we do have that arm's length, the commission acting apart from the General Assembly. There are 8 other members, all citizens appointed by retired circuit court judges, and there are high bars in the constitutional amendment for transparency. So it is not perfect, and I will be the first to admit that. But
Mike Turner is no weakling. Mike Turner is no weakling, and he caved to the elected who wanted the lines drawn a certain way.
But understand, Wendy, Senator Favola is exactly right. Understand, it was the elected official was not part of the process. I was an independent body that was trying to do this. So actually, I was a LCDC chair. So let's not kid ourselves that I wasn't partisan. But to Senator Favola's point, you're going to have Democrats and Republicans involved in the process. Yeah, ideally, I agree with you. You might have no electeds and no partisan politicians in the process. But let's be practical here. Even if they're all, quote, nonpartisan appointees, you know the parties are going to beat the bushes underneath to get their people into the position. So there is going to be some of that. But to Senator Favola's point, I think they've taken a good, healthy swipe at neutralizing as much as possible that party influence by balancing, making it bipartisan, and then having an independent component of at least half the commission. So I take your point, but I think Senator Favola's point is more compelling.
Senator Bell, would you like to respond to that?
Delegate Goditis is having way too much fun with that answer.
Delegate Goditis always has fun.
I love it when she smiles. I don't think I can add anything else. I mean, like I said, there's really no perfect process here. We're making a choice, but I do think, I'll repeat myself again, excuse me for doing that, we should separate what the LCDC does with what you personally do, because they're very different. And, you know, personally, I respect the fact that reasonable people can look at this, debate it, and come to different conclusions. Because, you know, with many of my colleagues and friends, we've done that, and there's really good arguments on both sides on this one. I've told you where I'm at, but as a committee, the ramifications are high. So I think that's important to separate those two.
Thank you.
Lisa, this is Mike. Can I just make one quick comment briefly? I know. Yeah, I know, and I understand. Take it at the micro level, at the local level. Had there been this commission set up locally in the county, exactly like the commission that they're going to set up, what I did would not have been possible. There still would have been pressure, but had there been a commission mirroring what we're proposing here at the local level, what I ended up doing, bowing to the pressure, would not have been possible.
Thank you, Mike. So we're going to move on to Jill Weiss, and then after Jill, it will be Neil Steinberg, then Tony Fasolo, and then Zach.
Okay. Thank you, Lisa. I read an article the other day that said there was a lawsuit that had been filed challenging the referendum and its placement on the ballot. And in the article, it said there was a question about whether or not Attorney General Mark Herring was going to defend the amendment. Does anybody know the status of the lawsuit and what the Attorney General position on it is?
The Attorney General, I can tell you, is obliged to defend what the General Assembly has decided. And that's what the Attorney General, frankly, was in the position of having to defend Republican gerrymandering before, because it's what the General Assembly did. And many times he had to go out and they would hire law firms to do it. And we spent, I think, well over $1 million of taxpayer dollars defending gerrymandered districts for the Republicans. So I can't tell you where that lawsuit is at right now, but I frankly think it'll be dismissed. I don't think it'll have a bearing, because the Code of Virginia and the Constitution are very clear about what the General Assembly can do, and whether you like the amendment or not. The amendment was passed, and the Privileges and Election Committee has voted. That's who is in charge, or is actually empowered to make the ballot and the decisions and the wording on the ballot. The Board of Elections, myself and Senator Boyce were on that committee. We worked with the Board of Elections, and all the rules were followed for that. So, and frankly, it's not abnormal for these things to go to court. It happens very frequently. So I'm not surprised that would be happening in this case. But my opinion is it's going to be on the ballot. And I doubt anything. I think Senator Boyce was going to add something. I see her hand is up.
I was just going to say, Jennifer, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I am doing a search. I mean, I'm on the Privileges and Elections Committee. John is on the Privileges and Elections Committee. Barbara, are you also?
I am not.
I haven't heard anything about a lawsuit. I'm doing a Google search. I'm not finding anything. So
I just want to add to something, to the explanation, just so everybody is clear. According to our U.S. Constitution, the legislative bodies make the decision on drawing the district lines.
yeah.
So this commission will be giving the General Assembly a recommendation. The way it is structured is the General Assembly will have an up or down vote. We won't be tearing it apart or renegotiating it. We have to vote up or down. But at the end of the day, it is the decision of the General Assembly. So I don't know why somebody would be taking a lawsuit on the wording of the constitutional amendment. That seems a little strange. The wording on the explanation, which may be what somebody is quibbling over, the explanation was determined by the Privileges and Elections Committees, and it was drafted, the explanation was drafted by our nonpartisan Division of Legislative Staff, our staff in the Division of Legislation. So, and approved by, again, the Board of Elections. So I don't know where this, I haven't heard about a lawsuit. I don't know where that might come from.
It's coming from Blue, Virginia.
The link to the lawsuit is now in the chat.
I found it.
Thank you. I was just looking for it to post it there. Thanks, Shelley.
I'm sorry, not the link to the lawsuit, but a link to the article about it.
Article.
Can I just add one other thing just to follow up on what my beautiful and lovely friend Wendy Godiatis just said, where she's equating whether elected officials are choosing the districts or not. We don't have, that's not a choice. It's either going to be all elected officials choosing or some elected officials and some citizens and then some judges will be part of it too. We don't have for the 2021 session, for the decades redistricting, this is what we have in front of us. We have either the amendment or not the amendment. And if we choose not the amendment, we will be doing it ourselves.
Thank you. And moving on to Neil Steinberg.
Okay, well, yeah, we assumed we'd be doing it ourselves. I have a question about the process. Once we have started a process of trying to amend the Constitution, so you said in 2019, the first year the vote was taken, that it was fashioned by the Republicans, and there was no changing it by even a comma. So in the last legislative session, would it have been possible to have simply defeated that entirely and started all over again this year?
I'll answer that if that's all right. You could, but that would mean you would have to, it would not go into effect till the 2030 census.
I understand that. I recognize we still would have been dealing with a legislative redistricting. I understand that. Yeah. But it seems to me that everybody's bending over backwards to try to accept what everybody seems to feel is less than an ideal law. And in the course of the conversation, more than one individual has mentioned this idea of a master, as it's called, in terms of a redistricting process, even to the point where the judges wouldn't be drawing the districts. They would choose a master. So I guess the question is, why didn't we try to get there right from the beginning, as opposed to this convoluted 8 legislators and 8 citizens?
I can answer that.
Go ahead.
First, let me just say, in my 8 years in the General Assembly, no piece of legislation that has passed has ever been perfect.
I'm sure.
No piece. And there were criticisms when that suggestion came up. And folks said, well, even though technology can give the appearance of independence and fairness, the computer program has to be written by somebody. and somebody's judgment will be involved, and we will have less control and oversight over a strictly computer generated drawn map than we would have over a process that actually does involve public comment, does involve drafts that people can look at, and does involve a more deliberative process that's more open to a sunshine law. So.
Well, I understand that. I wasn't even suggesting a computerized redistricting. I mean, I think everybody here recognizes how incredibly difficult drawing districts is in the first place, and there's no way you're coming up with perfect squares in any district. So it would still involve individuals doing the redistricting, but more under the auspices of a master such as it is, and then your independent citizens. It seems to me starting out with 8 legislators from the beginning right away gives people pause. And I suspect that's why we are right where we are right now with this discussion.
Right. I will just, and I appreciate that. And that your argument was considered and debated in a legislative process. And the flip side of it, the flip side to your argument is having lawmakers on the commission may actually provide needed insight and sort of a little bit of a buy-in from the General Assembly. Because remember, at the end of the day, the General Assembly is still making this decision, even though it's an up or down vote on the recommendation given to us by a commission. If there's some buy-in by the General Assembly with what we think the commission has done, the probability of the General Assembly accepting that recommendation will be higher. That was the flip argument. That was the argument that was made to the point you were making. So again, with everything, everybody is going to view things slightly differently or have a different framework. But I can honestly say over the 2 years that this constitutional amendment was in play in the General Assembly, I think I've heard every argument that you could possibly conjecture up on whether or not it's a good idea or a bad idea. And, I ended up with it's 85% there with something, but we never could get to 100%.
Let me add one thing to that too. The special masters, it's always controversial which special masters you pick. When they went to the court, it was controversial. Each side suggested special masters, and then the judges picked from there. So if you just say go to special masters, or which ones you pick, because that's very controversial in itself. And some people believe there's some that are more Democratic friendly, some more Republican friendly, some are pretty academic, but again, it's very debatable. And the issue with gerrymandering today, which, I think the 2 biggest threats to our democracy, frankly, are gerrymandering and the campaign finance.
I concur.
Things that are out of control. And the gerrymandering issue, with technology today, you can surgically, precisely gerrymander districts. You can literally take 1 or 2 homes on one street, put them in one district, the rest on another district. And that is how precise it's done to basically twist these districts. So I agree with what Barbara's saying. I don't think this is a 100% solution by any measure. Maybe it's an 85%, but the special masters, if we could find special masters, most people believe the deal we got out of the lawsuit in 2019 was a good deal for Democrats. Yeah. Because the special masters would actually come up with most of the districts they redrew, they came up with 2 or 3 options. And then they were reviewed, there were public hearings, the judges reviewed them, and then they picked them. And I can tell you the Republicans and Democrats submitted testimony for and against the options, looking at which one was best for each party. At the end of the day, most of the ones were picked by the courts were favorable for Democrats. And mainly because they had been so gerrymandered before. I would love to see us have a nonpartisan process. I would love to see us have a process that's better than what we have today. But I can tell you, Wendy said this, Jennifer said it, we have a majority in both bodies right now with gerrymandered districts in both bodies, okay? We don't need perfect districts. I'd love to have perfect districts. We just need ones that aren't completely imperfect, because that's what we've been dealing with for a decade. cheated districts everywhere.
Yeah, I don't think anybody argues that, but let me ask another question.
Neil, actually, can I move on to the next question?
Okay, I'll ask it in the chat. Thanks.
Thank you. Tony Fasella, you're up, and then it will be Zach, and after that it will be Tammy.
Okay, thank you. Actually, Senator Bell said what I was going to say. I'm the oldest guy here. I think I'm the 83-year-old white-haired guy. And two things that I think get in the way of our democracy is campaign financing, that the need for elected officials to raise money to get elected. And the other thing is gerrymandering. And those are two things that, I still remember we were upset with Republicans say, well, look at Maryland, they're all Democrats, so they did gerrymander. It works all, and that's got to stop. So I thank you all for being here and explaining your positions. And I know the way I'm going to vote. I'm going to vote in favor of it. And I also agree with Senator Bell. We should. I know we're not going to vote tonight, but I think we should take a no position on this, just for protection of our organization. So thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Zach, you're up.
Yeah, so the big thing that had always been a huge argument for a gerrymandering reform had been the whole legislators picking their districts thing, and this stuff really doesn't solve that. Like the people on the commission are appointed by the majority and the majority and the minority leaders in each party in each house of the legislature. Like those citizen members of the commission are probably not going to be random citizens. They're going to be folks who are appointed. The judges pick from a list that are picked by the Speaker of the House, the Senate pro tempore, et cetera. It's like we're still going to be getting partisan politicians drawing the maps. It's just that some of them might be people more like me, or as opposed to people who are legislators. So I really this doesn't solve that. This really just doesn't solve that issue. And I would remind people that Hans von Spakovsky is perfectly qualified to serve as a special master. And we got lucky on getting a special master in the last couple times, but it's entirely possible that we could get a bad special master. So I think we should just not pass this and pass something better in future years.
I guess my only, and I appreciate that thought. I guess my only concern is like, this is our last shot for the redistricting effort for the next 10 years. So if we don't pass the constitutional amendment, then the General Assembly actually would be drawing the lines. And I mean, this is a generational thing. I really, really hope we can get something done that will allow us to do a nonpartisan redistricting. And we can always tweak the criteria legislation that passed. We did pass some other enabling legislation. We came close to passing an enactment legislation. All of these things will sort of provide the belt and suspenders, but I'd like to get one part of that, maybe the suspenders, and maybe the belt is more legislation, but I'd like to get something on the, in our Constitution that really enshrines our commitment to, racial, how did we put it? The drawing of districts that really honors, racial interests, ethnic interests, and communities of interest in a way that just can't be removed by the General Assembly.
But what would stop us from what would stop us from passing this in 21-22 and then passing it on the general, in the general election in 22 and then redistricting in 23?
So Zach,
There's a constitutional amendment. According to the state constitution now, we have to redistrict in the years ending in 1. That's already a constitutional amendment.
That's the year ending 1 after the census, which is
After the census, yes, that's
Right,
correct.
but aren't we're talking about amending the Constitution though, right? Like,
you would be talking about a different amendment to do that.
right. Like we could pass an amendment in 21 and 22 to do something, to do an actually good redistricting amendment and then just redistrict in 23, right?
So
No.
Zach,
No, you
Zach, one of the things.
No,
that
we can.
you're-
No, the Constitution can't be amended to allow a redistricting in 23.
You're talking about 2 different amendments. You're talking
Right.
about.
I'm talking about if this amendment fails, couldn't we then do a better redistricting amendment?
Yes, we could.
We could, but it wouldn't go into effect until 2030
Why
after
not?
the census, unless you did a separate amendment to change that as well. So you'd have to have 2 separate amendments to go to the voters to do what you're talking.
Why would they have to be separate? This amendment changes 2 sections of the Constitution and is
No.
one amendment.
This is about the redistricting process, not when the redistricting process is done.
So, Zach, one of the things that I wanted to point out, because I was on P&E and Delegate Cia Price had been working on creating a nonpartisan redistricting process through the legislative process instead of actually doing the constitutional amendment. So the intent was with hers is that hopefully we would have killed the amendment. We did not, and so therefore we're living with that. But the intent was to actually kill the amendment, have a nonpartisan process in place through legislation that we would then be able to use for 2021. So that would kind of meet all of the kind of goals and objectives that we have for nonpartisan redistricting. And then we would be able to know what worked and what didn't work. We could then do a new constitutional amendment that would go into effect for 2031. But what we would have had a legislative nonpartisan redistricting for 2021 and a constitutional amendment in place for 2031, which would have been a lasting legacy for all of us. But again, that didn't happen because again, there was a lot of folks that were kind of looking at this and saying much of the same things that I'm hearing here is that this is what we fought so hard for, but it's really not what we fought for. We fought for nonpartisan, and this is just bipartisan redistricting kind of with a different wrapping on it.
I think it's important to note on what David just said, though. If we do it legislatively, Democrats lose power. Guarantee you Republicans will legislatively get rid of that and come up with their own method. That can be changed with the majority. If it's not a constitutional amendment, if it's just done legislatively, it can be changed with the majority. The political winds flow a different way, it's changed.
Thank you. So we're going to move on to the next question, which is from Tammy Cummings, then Charlotte McConnell, and then the last question of the evening will be from Steve Morgan, and that's the questions to the elected officials. So after Steve Morgan, we are releasing all of our elected officials into the evening.
Yeah, you poor guys. Oh.
But we will keep it open for LCDC members to discuss everything because we do have this vote coming up on Thursday.
Hi. All right, Senator Favola, I was just wondering, you keep saying that turning things over to the General Assembly, having this fall to the General Assembly if we don't pass this amendment is a bad thing, but didn't we pass HB 1255, the SB 717, that actually puts restraints on the General Assembly and has further anti-gerrymandering language than this amendment? I mean, didn't they specifically say that you could not mix, that it prohibits reportioning to allocate for the purpose of favoring one political party over another?
Right.
It
And
also has the racial specifications that are both in the federal government and here, and it protects the parties of interest. So haven't we already restricted our General Assembly enough?
Well,
that we don't really need to have this amendment?
Well, that would be guidance to the commission.
Mm-hmm.
So the commission would be using those guidelines to assist themselves.
So with the General Assembly, if the General Assembly is doing it?
Well, if the General Assembly is doing it, then you have all lawmakers doing it, as opposed to a commission that's apart from the General Assembly.
But wouldn't they still be under the same guidelines? HB
It would be the same
1255?
guidelines, but they would be interpreted through people who have a vested interest in how the lines are drawn.
But in
And
this
that's the difference.
amendment, they also have a vested interest because it's a bipartisan.
Well, you've only got 8 lawmakers on the commission. You have 140 lawmakers in the General Assembly, each lawmaker having a very vested interest in how the lines are drawn. At least on the commission, you only have 8 lawmakers who are balanced by 8 citizens.
But
And
those eight, no, the citizens don't balance them out because the citizens are actually chosen by the legislatures.
no. The citizens are chosen by retired circuit court judges.
After the names are selected by the legislatures and then present them to the judges.
There's a long list of names that would go to the circuit court judges. I mean, I guess to your point, I understand that you want something to be perfect. No matter what we do, there will be people involved, there will be judgment, and individuals, we will have to hold them to a very high bar of trustworthiness and fairness. But there will be people involved. I cannot give you somebody who is a complete blank and has no prior experiences, no biases. That person doesn't exist. I am trusting that retired circuit court judges, even though the list comes from the General Assembly, will exercise the highest level of judgment in providing us with individuals who, in fact, will honor the expectation of being trustworthy, will honor the noble mission we're giving them, will do their darndest to come up with something that really is, that honors the fairness in both racially and in other ways that we want. I mean, this is an important job.
I know.
And
you're asking us to have a lot of trust and,
but we do
not having a lot of, I would prefer more safeguards.
Well, I think, the legislation provides some safeguards that you just mentioned, and the constitutional amendment itself has the transparency safeguards, which can't ever be eroded by another legislature.
But if this goes to the Supreme Court and they have to draw the lines, then the transparency goes away. And also the Supreme Court will not be held to HB 1255 because they're not legislators. So if this falls to the Supreme Court, we lose transparency and we lose our safeguards.
Well, Tammy, I hate to say this, but no matter who draws those lines, there will be a lawsuit and it will end up with the Supreme Court. That's just our system. We have checks and balances and nobody will be happy. Not everybody will be happy.
But if this goes to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court draws the lines, they are the law of the land. They cannot try themselves. So there is no going back on the maps that the Supreme Court draws. We will have no way, we will have no safeguards.
That's just it. We don't have a safeguard now. You can't create a safeguard against the Supreme Court. That's not possible.
The cases go to the federal court.
The General Assembly no, we have to follow. It's a state case. There's a whole base of laws and structures of the court. So we can't just pick the courts it goes to. We have to follow the statutes that are currently crafted for dealing with state issues versus federal issues and all that.
Right.
That's another whole base.
But the state has to push it up to the federal level.
I'm going to interrupt here just for
Well, I guess, again, if the General Assembly were to draw the lines, a lawsuit would be taken and it would go to the Supreme Court. And no court in the land has ever drawn the districts. They have all turned to a special master. So there's just no way you're going to get around the Supreme Court. They're in the game because of the way
Senator Favola, it seems like Senator Bell has got some things he would like
to
say.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to say is realize that the legislation you're talking about, Tammy, it's moot if the amendment fails. If the amendment fails, then the General Assembly isn't going to use a redistricting commission. The General Assembly is just going to form new districts. So
So HB 1255 falls out to the wayside if this amendment doesn't pass?
It's based on, that is the enactment clauses for this amendment.
Oh, I did not know that. Okay, thank you.
One of the things that I wanted
Thank you,
to talk
John.
about.
That was much more specific. There was much more to the point than my little.
Okay, I did not know that.
Yeah, it'll be a gerrymandering free for all if this goes away. Because again, look, I don't honestly trust either party with this because it's too tempting to gerrymander, and that's why it happened so many times over the years. But the Republicans gerrymandered us very badly. There's many Democrats who are upset about it, who suffered and are ready for payback. If this bill goes down, there will be gerrymandering, and probably all of us on this call will benefit from it. And we'll see Dave LaRock go down. I'd love that. But also, I believe, you know, in integrity, that I've said I'm for nonpartisan, so that's why I'm for it, because I think our ideas, as Senator Boysko said, are better. I think what we do for the people is better, and I think we can win with fair districts. You know, it's hard with completely unfair districts, which is what we've been dealing with, but anything's better than what we have today.
Tammy, Lisa, I just wanted to share with you that it's like, again, the way that the redistricting would be done now, it would start with the Privileges and Elections Committee, and those 22 members would probably get a lot of pressure from other members. So Senator Favola is correct. I mean, there would be 140 different inputs, but it all kind of flows into that. I think we are kind of not taking it serious if we don't think once those 8 individuals are identified and those citizen committee members, that there's not going to be people that are going to be trying to influence them as well. And so therefore, it doesn't matter whether it's the 22 of the sitting Privileges and Elections or the 8 and the other 8 citizens that are going to be doing this. I think we're putting a whole lot of faith on human good intentions to like just go, okay, I'm going to stand back and I'm just going to like take whatever happens. I think what happens is it gets, what it ends up doing is it institutionalizes in the Constitution bipartisan redistricting, not nonpartisan redistricting. So we all then have to adjust our expectations and say, okay, we're okay with it being bipartisan, but well, because in the past it was been strictly partisan. As Senator Bill said, the party in power is the one who draws the districts, and then as Senator Favola said, it generally results in some type of court case. So that was part of the problem in the discussion that we had on the House side, is that this is not really what it is that we wanted. This is, you've kind of put a, what is it, making a silk purse out of a sow's ear or something like that. You're calling it nonpartisan redistricting. It's not. It's bipartisan redistricting with a lot of partisan stuff inserted along the way. And we're putting a whole lot of faith in human good intentions, that it's like, okay, I'm the retired circuit court judges. I'm going to pick people that are going to be nonpartisan. And oh, when it gets to the Supreme Court, because as everyone's correctly said, there's nothing that says that they have to actually hire a special master. Right. We're hoping that they're going to follow the kind of the precedent that has been set in other places and hire a special master. In the legislation that we had worked on in the House, there was actually going to be, again, we were trying to create this randomness, this nonpartisan thing, where there were going to be multiple special masters that were going to be proposed, and then they could pick one of them. So that it wasn't just always going to be, I'm going to pick Tammy Cummins as a special master because I know she'll draw the districts the way I want. Mm-hmm. So there was a whole lot of thought put into how to do this legislatively as a nonpartisan approach in the House. Now, again, you could say if this fails, then the onus falls back on us to go, okay, do we just draw the districts the way that we've always done before, or do we hold ourselves to a higher standard and actually apply those rules that we had started to put in place in the House of Delegates? And I will tell you, there's a lot of people in the House of Delegates, including Wendy, who would scream to the high heavens if we just went back to doing partisan redistricting again. And so therefore, I think that there would be a desire to do something truly nonpartisan, and then have some type of backstop where it's like, okay, if it doesn't work, we're going to have some type of pool of special masters, and then it could end up in a court case. And then to Zach's point, we could then use this as a lessons learned and go, okay, we've gotten through this. This has worked well. Now let's do a constitutional amendment, and let's assume we're all still in the majority.
That makes absolute sense to me. And you said that so much better than I did. Thank you.
That we could then put it in place for 2031. So there's not a need to do a second one because again, you'd have to trust. I mean, we're all asking for a certain degree of trust. Barbara's asking for trust. John's asking for trust. I'm saying that if it fails, we need to put some trust in the House delegates and the Senate to kind of say, we've always been committed to nonpartisan. Now's the time to deliver.
Delegate Gudaitis, would you like to close up on the question here?
Can I add to that too?
I'd like to add too.
Okay, Delegate Gudaitis, then Boyska, then we really got to move on to our next question.
Okay, I just want to say that, think about this. I think that my fellow delegates, my caucus members are amazing and intelligent and so smart and so, they take this job so seriously and they look at all sides of an issue. And 46 Democrats voted against this. 46 in the House voted against this. Every member of our Virginia Legislative Black Caucus voted against this. There are reasons.
From the House. From the House.
Was that was all you were saying?
I do have a list of all.
I had wanted to add something. So Zach, you were asking why we couldn't just change when we do our redistricting. I don't know if anybody, I dropped off and dropped back on because I had a problem with my computer, but we tie this redistricting with the census, which looks at the changes in demographics and population throughout the Commonwealth. So there's a reason that it goes on the 1 year every decade. And that's not something that we would be changing, in my opinion. Again, if we do a constitutional amendment, that would prevent the other party from changing the rules on us midway through the decade. It would prevent the other party from changing the rules and trying to surprise someone who isn't there one day out of nowhere. I think it makes sense for us to do this, and there is no, as all of my colleagues have said, there's not a perfect solution. This is a messy process. It's, you know, we talk about making sausage. This is part of it, right? Like, nobody really wants to look at what actually happens, but hopefully we're happy with a result that is somewhat having integrity and that we can all live with. And I think that's what this constitutional amendment is. The longest serving members in the General Assembly, from Ken Plum to Janet Howell to Dick Saslaw, all support this. They have seen the different iterations and the different things that have been presented over the decades that they have served, and they supported the constitutional amendment. And I'm just going to end with saying that I think that because everybody's feeling passionate on both sides, I would ask that the committee not take a position on this. I don't want to see winners and losers. I want us all to be united. I want us all to work to get Donald Trump out of the White House and flip the Senate and hold the House. And I think that's where I'm going to be putting my energy, and I hope that's where the rest of the committee does. And I want to thank you all for your time and passion and interest in doing the right thing.
Thank you, Senator Boysko. Charlotte, you are up, followed by Steve Morgan, and Steve Morgan will be our last question towards our elected officials.
Thank you. So I'm really confused because I'm looking at this chapter 21265. I think Senator Boysko actually put this link in the text where it has been enacted by the General Assembly of Virginia that districts should be drawn to preserve communities of interest for the purpose of this division. A community of interest goes on and does not include political affiliation. So doesn't this legislation prevent Democrats from gerrymandering in the future where, yes, Our current process is not great. We just passed some things that will help it. But when it comes to changing our constitution, I think we should aim for perfect, because yes, we are still dealing with that amendment to remove the Marshall Newman. And I think the main problem right now is voter education around this issue. What has been done? People are going to go into the polls. I know for the first time, I am not going to be there on election day, standing out in front of my polling location, handing out information and explaining things to voters. And when you look at the language, which I put in the chat, it is very confusing, I think, for the average person. And when I read it, should 8 members of the General Assembly and 8 citizens of the Commonwealth be responsible for drawing congressional districts right there? No, they should not be involved in the process. And I was very much on the fence coming into here, and there are voices missing from this conversation here in Loudoun. Thanks, Jan, for pointing out the lack of diversity in this group right now. And I do look to those 46 House Dems that voted against it, and I do think that they're on the more progressive side. And doing this, we are going to have a problem that we aren't going to recover from as quickly, where we have, I think, protections in place so Democrats won't gerrymander, and then let's work on something that actually has nonpartisan and independent in it, instead of just, this is what happens, I think, when two sides can't move forward. I mean, this is the result of a divided General Assembly. No one is getting anything that they want. And personally, I think that it is really unfortunate that we are here in this position, and our party as a Democratic committee is to educate the people in our community. And I agree that our state party was right in passing, and we should check that box and vote no. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. And our last comment to our elected officials. Steve, you are up.
Thank you. Well, I guess the first thing I wanted to mention is I really don't like the fact that this amendment is constantly referred to as nonpartisan, because it's really bipartisan. And the citizen component that's being talked about represents citizens drawn from a list provided by party leaders, and probably Ken Cuccinelli could qualify to represent as a citizen, potentially. And the other comment that I wanted to make, we touched on some things already that I was going to ask about, but I wanted to mention there's something else big that happened after this bill was voted on the first time, and that is that the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that it will no longer hear cases of partisan gerrymandering. So that puts extra emphasis on the Virginia Supreme Court's independence and non-reviewability in this process, and the fact that it could be potentially a partisan Republican Supreme Court. And there are really no guardrails in the amendment that restrict them. And I'll leave it at that. I'm happy to hear any further comments.
I would just conclude by saying, I mean, there are a list of very highly regarded groups that have endorsed this constitutional amendment. I mean, I could read you the 40 names, and of course, all the major newspapers have endorsed the amendment. And I do understand the comments from people who have pointed out that it's bipartisan, it's not nonpartisan. I get all that. I just think that we are all after the same overall goal here, which is to do away with this blatant gerrymandering that lawmakers on both sides of the aisle have been participating in for far too long. So what we need to do, in my view, is, given the position that some of the committee members have, given the position of the state Democratic Party, I would ask the committee to not take a position on this question. I think there are reasonable people on both sides who have come out on a different position on this constitutional amendment. And remember, at the end of the day, when you're explaining to voters, you're losing. And the question before the voters is not whether this is perfect. It's whether a bipartisan commission should make the initial draft or should do the initial draw of these district lines, or should the General Assembly do that? That's the question. And when you look at it that way, there'll be a fair number of voters who are going to vote for this constitutional amendment. I'm not asking the committee to endorse it. I respect the views of those of you who know it's not perfect, and I understand all the work you've done. I'm just asking that the committee not take a position.
So Lisa, if I could just have.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Favola. Go ahead, Delegate Reed.
And I know some of you have heard me say this before, and this really highlights what you're seeing is that at some point you have to transition from campaigning to governing, and governing is really hard. And this is a really good example of that, because as Wendy pointed out, we had a whole lot of discussions internal to the Democratic House Caucus. We're having differences of opinions here between the House and the Senate. And as Barbara said, it's like we need to be able to focus on what we want to do in November of this year. And I do not believe that this is the solution that we really had kind of wanted to go forward with. But I'm going to leave it up to y'all to make the decision that you think is best for the committee. I think we did this today so that you can be more informed, and you have now, you have this ability to know what were some of the discussions that we were having going on inside the caucus on each side. And so this is a whole lot more information than a lot of people don't get access to. And now you kind of get to be your own version of a delegate or a state senator and go, okay, now I've got all of this information and I have my core values of what I believe in. What do I do? And these are kind of the dilemmas that we're faced with every day. So I'm not going to make a recommendation or one way or the other. I had to come to a very personal decision. I know Wendy had to come to a very personal decision, and same thing for a lot of my other delegates. And we grappled with this for a long time. I mean, internal to the caucus. And so I won't question anybody about what they decide to do, but it really highlights how difficult it is to actually govern. And so I appreciate y'all giving us the time tonight.
Thank you, Delegate Reed. Delegate Goditis, looks like you want to speak.
I so appreciate LCDC. I so appreciate the willingness to listen. Please, I want everyone to know how much I adore my Senate Loudoun representatives, even if they are so sadly wrong on this issue. Again, I'm holding out for the dream, the independent commission, no legislators. And do vote your conscience on this, but yes, don't risk LCDC and don't risk a reorg, in my opinion. And thank you so much, everybody. And thanks, David Reed, for coming back and helping me against these Senate toughies there.
Thank you, Delegate Goditis. Senator Boysko, would you like to say something to close out your statements?
Well, absolutely. Liz here wanted to say hello to everybody. She is for peace and harmony. Sorry. I just want to say again that I appreciate that you all are interested in trying to figure this out. I think that David Reed really put it together well, talking about that this is the kind of stuff that we really grapple with. And sometimes you can see good points on both sides and you have to figure out where you're gonna land in the General Assembly on all the kinds of difficult, complex issues that we deal with. I believe that we still have an opportunity in January to further clarify legislation. I put up there Delegate Van Valkenburg and Senator Lucas had companion bills that would have really made a very clear, clean criteria bill that would have gone far into it, naming that the members of the citizens members of the commission would not have partisan background, that there would be two special masters, a Republican and a Democrat, that we would have to follow the criteria to make sure that communities of interest and communities of color and just a much more broad, giving specific guidance on how this should go. I would hope that we will take that up in January and pass that so that it could be ready in time for the redistricting process. This is a difficult decision. People have made good points on both sides. I will just say one more time, I hope the committee does not choose to weigh in on either side, but lets everybody make that decision for themselves with the information that they gather. And again, I thank you all for always being such a great group of folks who really grapple with issues and fight for what you believe in. I think that's wonderful, and we're really in a great place.
Thank you so much, Senator Boysko. Senator Bell, would you like to close out our elected official speaking part?
Let me just say thank you for all for taking time in this. I think it's been a great discussion. We've all grappled with this one for a while, and frankly, I think that's exactly what our founders wanted us to do. You know, changing the Constitution shouldn't be easy. We should have disagreements. We should go back and forth because it's a big deal. You know, I mean, the Republicans over the last decade have tried to change our Constitution for so many frivolous things. Thankfully, the voters stopped them and wouldn't let them do that. So I appreciate this discussion, and I hope you can appreciate that we didn't arrive at this easily. There's been a lot of debate, and the debate still rages on this one. I would again just reiterate, I respect either side you come down on this issue personally, and frankly, I've been conflicted on this myself. I've told you where I'm at, but it's not a no-brainer. It's hard. But as a committee, I definitely recommend you take a no position, because I don't want to see LCDC thrust into a reorg and really get distracted when that's exactly what the Republicans would want, is for us to be distracted right now. Because our task this year, our number one task, and one that I plan to do everything I can in this crazy pandemic world we live in, one that has been made so bad by Donald Trump, who's also trying to sabotage the post office, is we need to deliver Loudoun County for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. So it's what we need to do. There's no doubt about it. We deliver Loudoun County, then Trump will be defeated in Virginia, and we'll be hopefully rid of this Trump cancer that has hurt our country so bad. So I would vote your conscience, but as a committee, please ask that you take no position. Thank you so much for being here, Lisa, everybody. Shelley, thanks for organizing all this, all the work that went into this. I know it was a big deal and it's a tough issue, but thank you for everybody for being a part of this.
Thank you, Senator Bell, and thank you all of our electeds for taking the time this evening and having these discussions with us. We are now freeing you to the evening, but all the members, if you would like to stay on, because we do need to sort of talk about this no position vote and kind of what that means. So if that is something that you're interested in, especially with the vote coming up on Thursday, please stay on so that we can continue that conversation. But thank you again, all of our elected officials.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, and Tyler, can we stop recording?